All right, we are live. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. How about you give everybody a brief overview of who you are, what you do?
Oh dear. Well, okay.
Uh-oh.
I'm a professor at the law school at Queens, and I run a think tank called Rights Probe, which is a project of the Energy Probe Research Foundation, which is a very long-standing um, think tank in Canada, dealt with all kinds of issues like energy and environment and property rights and so on. And I've been involved in you have a friend. That's not great.
Sorry.
Rights Probe has been involved in all kinds of things, starting with the COVID debacle, and now with Alberta independence, and all things in between. So that just people can find me at rightsprobe.org, where all our materials are posted. Also, I have a Substack under my name, and they can follow me on X at Pardy Bruce.
Okay. Are you in Alberta?
I'm not presently in Alberta at the moment, although I have been there recently and will be again. But right now I'm in Toronto.
Okay. Okay. And are you teaching right now at Queens?
I'm actually on sabbatical this year, so I won't be in
Okay.
Kingston very much.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Very good. All right. So let's jump into it. So we're going to talk about Bill C9 and Bill C8. So why don't you give people an overview of Bill C9?
Yes. Okay. So thanks. These two bills, C8 and C9, are actually quite different, but they're also connected. Right. So Bill C9 is a bill that the government has introduced to provide amendments to the criminal code. This is the hate speech bill. And it's got some problematic parts to it. You may recall that in the previous parliament, they had a bill called C63, which was also about speech. And it was more far-ranging than this one. This is just criminal code. The other one was problematic in many ways. This is a narrower version of C63. And it's all about hate speech and hate crimes and so on. And I'll get into the details of that, but I just want to give a perspective, a context for the moment, which is this. As bad as Bill C8 is, we already have provisions in the criminal code that prohibit hate speech. Unlike the Americans. So in both Canada and the US, we have a constitutional provision, ours in the Charter and theirs in the Bill of Rights. It says freedom of expression, free speech. And both provisions are very bald, like there's no detail. It just says, freedom of speech. And you would have thought, therefore, that given the similarities in the provisions, that the law, the content of those rights would be the same. But of course, that's not so, because there's two different countries and two different courts, and we have ended up in a much different place than the Americans have. Under our freedom of expression provision guarantee in the Charter of Rights, the Supreme Court of Canada has said that the government can police your so-called hate speech, which is not a thing in the U.S. They don't police hate speech because there is no such thing as hate speech, because the Constitution doesn't allow the government to police hate speech. Right. So we are already in bad territory. And we have an existing provision in the criminal code in section 319. I'll just refer people to it. That prohibits hate speech. It goes like this. This is 319.2. Everyone who by communicating statements other than in private conversation willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group is guilty of an offense. Now, what is hate speech? And of course, nobody knows what hate speech is. And one of the things that the government is doing in this bill, C9, is to propose a definition of hate speech. And the definition that they propose is this. Well, they're proposing a definition of hatred. Hatred means, they say, hatred means the emotion that involves detestation or vilification, and that is stronger than disdain or dislike. Now, nobody knows what that means. Nobody knows
No.
where the line is between the one thing and the other thing. No one has ever really known where the line is between hate speech and allowed speech. So we're into territory already where the government has the discretion to decide that you stepped over the line without you being able to tell you stepped over the line, right? So this is different from a lot of other criminal offenses. So you're going to know. I mean, not in every case, but most of the time, people generally know what an assault is. Like, you can't attack people.
Yeah.
The line to cross is violence. You can't become violent with other people. You can't break into their home. You can't steal their car. We sort of understand what it is we're not allowed to do in those basic, common, familiar criminal offenses. With hate speech, one of the many problems with this is that nobody knows where the line is, and the discretion of law enforcement and government priorities will determine who it is and when are going to be pursued for crossing this line. In other words, we are now going to be subject, not that we aren't already, subject to the discretionary decision-making of officials as opposed to subject to the law itself. And this is not, if I can put it this way, this is not living in accordance with the rule of law. This is living in accordance with the discretionary decisions of other people.
Yes, it's incredibly arbitrary. And when I think back to the Trudeau regime and I think back to some of the comments that he made about various groups, I think that those would fall under, subjectively would fall under this. I mean, he made very, very hateful comments about the
Sure.
unvaccinated, for example.
Sure. About the unvaccinated. And of course, you can find all kinds of derogatory things said about, white people or Christians or men, or as the case may be, right? And nobody, or very rarely does anybody suggest that crosses the line into hate speech. And frankly, for my money, it shouldn't. I mean, people should be allowed to say this. Let's just make a very basic statement. If we lived in an actually free country, we would be allowed to hate other people because that's part of being human. And if you do hate them, then you would also be allowed to say that you do. Right? Now, nobody wants to hear hate speech, but it's part of being in a free society. And so the Americans have this one right, and we have it wrong. Hate speech should not be a thing in the law. But our Supreme Court has given us this problem. And in fact, the wording of that definition that I read out to you from the bill, I mean, the government's been very clever about this because those words are taken from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said, well, it's okay to police speech, that detests and vilifies, as long as you don't police speech that, expresses dislike. Well, that's not helpful. But
No, it's completely subjective.
So the government is doing us a disservice, but the Supreme Court has done the first disservice, and the government's just picking up on it.
Yeah. I think it's also important to underscore to people that we have a criminal code that covers violent threats. It covers incitement to violence, and
Yes.
that isn't protected speech in the US or anywhere else. And
Right.
it's not being applied. That is not being applied already on our streets. I know this from the reporting that I do.
Right.
So we don't need more bad legislation, which I believe will be uniquely applied to people like myself who are highly critical of the state.
Sure. Well, you can see this happening in the UK, right?
Yeah.
People are being, arrested for their tweets, and the police are coming to their door for social media posts that, sometimes the police say, well, this is not an illegal post, but we are concerned about what you've said.
Yeah. They
And so
just
on,
show
right?
up and kind of threaten, but without threatening, like just
Yeah.
a subtle
This
threat.
is not okay, right? But to your point, and it's quite right, we already have an appropriate line elsewhere in the criminal code, which is you can't commit violence and you can't threaten violence. And that's appropriate. I mean, free speech is great and important, but the limit for free speech in my books is you can't threaten violence. Like if you go up to somebody on the street, real close and say, you give me your wallet or I'll run you through. Okay. No. That's threatening violence. That's an assault. That it should be a criminal offense. Okay? It's still speech, but it's a criminal offense. But if you're not doing that, if you're not threatening violence, if you're not advocating the death of, them, then even if what you say is disdainful and it vilifies and detests, so what? I mean, you're expressing your view, and even if your view is distasteful to people, you should be able to speak it if you live in a free country. And more, that is very much in doubt in this country.
Yeah, I I think that part of the reason that this happened was like the machinations began with political correctness. And I think that conservatives, as kind of the arbiters of tradition, thought that it was a good idea to support the idea of civility,
Mm-hmm.
which I agree with. I can be vulgar at times, but I try and minimize it. I think that society is better when people are more sophisticated in their expression of frustrations and anger and criticism. But it has ushered in all of this egregious legislation, the thing is, this cat is out of control. I don't even know what to do. He's never been so bad before. I
Want, want,
apologize for the
wants
distraction.
your attention.
He does. I might put him in my lap because I don't know how to
Sure, why
handle
not?
him.
Go for it.
But yeah, I think that opened the door, political correctness, even though it was a Soviet term and everybody would have done well to understand the root of
Yes,
it.
yes,
But I think in the West, that was ushered in, this political correctness. And, it's nicer to live in a civilized society where people aren't nasty. Agreed. But there needs to be robust disagreement. And we need to be able to criticize, especially the state. We need to be able to criticize other, certain groups. Like it's reached this absurdity that trans identifying males who are encroaching on female spaces and sex based rights, that if anybody criticizes them, that they're at risk now for hate speech.
yes,
So, if I say I don't want a perverted, demented male to go into the locker room with 7-year-old girls,
mhm,
will that be protected speech? I don't think so.
yes,
Not under these laws, right? Because now they're considered a protected group.
yes, correct. That is so. But let's go back a little bit. Uh, so long ago, when the conservatives were ascendant, and before political correctness, and before the progressives took over, when the conservatives were in control of things, they censored speech too. They censored obscenity. They censored
Yeah.
heresy. Right. So this is, and it was the left, say in the 60s, that championed the idea of free speech. Okay. And now everything is turned on its head. But so the conservatives are not innocent about this. It's just that the progressive left wants to censor different things than the conservative right does. And so once you accept the proposition that it is a legitimate exercise of state power to supervise speech, then you're in trouble, because it's going to come back to bite you, because somebody's going to get into power that doesn't believe in the same standards as you do. And that's what happened to conservatives who are now champions of free speech. Right? And thankfully so, but the slate is not clean. about this. A few years back, I was testifying in front of a Senate committee on Bill C-16, which was the federal bill that inserted gender expression and gender identity into the Canadian Human Rights Act. And the session was all about whether or not that would constitute an infringement of free speech, because people would be required to use pronouns and so on. And one of the senators during this session said to me, I'm a free speech guy. He said, but this just seems like reasonable speech to me. It's just reasonable that people should be, using other people's preferred pronoun. And I said to him, and I forget the exact words, I said, in that case, you do not understand what free speech is. Free speech is not reasonable speech. The state is not able to require us to speak reasonably. That is not free speech. Like, just imagine this kind of statute. Imagine a statute that said, when Canadians are walking out on the street, they are required to say hello and please and thank you. Okay. Well, hello and please and thank you are completely reasonable things to say. But if the government is requiring you to say them, then you don't have free speech. All right. So it's got nothing to do with the actual standards that are being imposed. It has to do with whether or not you are saying what's inside your head and yours alone. So as long as you are not threatening violence or counseling a crime, your speech should be yours. But that is not where we're at, and it's not where we've been at for a long, long time. And it's just right now that things are getting ever more serious, more extreme, that we now think we have a problem. We've had a problem for a long time, and it's just coming home to roost now.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most frustrating things is that people don't have an understanding that we can have other ways of enforcing social norms. People,
Right. Yeah, sure.
people who are really disagreeable
Yes,
generally are ostracized.
exactly so.
It happens naturally. We don't need a top-down enforcement of that.
Right. And people are defaulting to wanting somebody above with power to do all their social policing for them. I don't know if it's because we're losing the skills, we don't interact the same way anymore, whether or not people have lost the skill of having social relations. I don't know, but I do know that more and more, whenever there's a problem, people think, oh, there ought to be a law to make you stop doing that. And that's completely the wrong path to go down.
Yeah, and we know this because most conventions are not top down through the law. The law reflects human behavior for the most part.
I like to think of the law as a backstop for when things go really off the rails. For the extreme case, you need law. You need law to prevent violence. You don't want fighting in the streets. You want to keep the peace. But it's not a blueprint for the way everybody is supposed to behave every day. This is not the parents supervising the children. We are all independent, competent adults with the mandate to make our own decisions about how to behave. And those people who interact with us can decide whether or not they want to based upon that behavior, right? When you lose that, you're toast.
I agree. And I personally would prefer to know where people stand. I'm very direct. People know exactly where I stand on every issue, and they can govern themselves accordingly and associate with me freely or not. Right. But if people are skulking around with really nasty thoughts, I personally would rather know so that I can avoid them.
Sure. You want to know who the idiots are, so you can steer clear. For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. I wanted to get into Bill C9 a bit too.
Sure, yes.
Can kind of go back and forth between the two of them. But I did want to say
C9 is the one. C9 is the hate speech one.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's C8. We're moving backwards.
So before we leave C9, let me just maybe just mention a couple of the other things people are concerned about. in this bill. And it's a fairly short bill. It's a much shorter bill than C-63 was. It just deals with the criminal code.
Awesome.
But in addition to that definition that I read out, there are a couple of other problematic things. So here's one. It creates an offense of essentially of intimidation. And here's the way they describe it. They say every person commits an offense who does the following thing: who engages in any conduct with the intent to provoke a state of fear in order to impede their access to, a certain kind of building, like a religious building or administrative building or a school, that kind of thing. But engages in any conduct with the intent to provoke a state of fear. Now, here's the problem. I mentioned to you that example of going up to somebody on the sidewalk and saying, give me your wallet or I'll run you through. That's an assault. It's a threat of force. Okay. That is not this. This does not have to involve a threat of force. The intent to provoke a state of fear, that means that if you're walking into a school, for example, and there's a picket line with a strike, and the picketers are yelling and they have signs and they're insulting you and for going in, for going through the picket line to going to do what you're supposed to be doing, and they're trying to intimidate you from, trying to make you change your mind about what you want to do. Okay. Now, we don't know whether or not that conduct is going to be criminal or not, because they're not threatening violence, but they are engaging in conduct designed to intimidate you. That should be fine. As long as it's not violence, you can try to persuade your fellow human beings to do things that you think are proper. And if they want to agree, they can do so. If they want to disagree, they can carry on, as long as there's no violence involved. This creates an offense in which violence is not involved. It's simply an expression of words and actions so as to provoke a state of fear. Not a fear of violence, just generally a state of fear. And in this very, very sensitive age where people are fragile, invoking a state of fear is going to be very easy to do.
Yeah. And again, we already have laws to prevent harassment. So,
Harassment? Yes.
if people showed up at a funeral and they were
Yes.
screeching and they were in people's faces and they were just behaving horribly,
Mhm.
they could be removed for harassment.
Yes, we have harassment. And we also have, like, if you physically, with force, block someone's path into a building, that is also going to cross a line, right? So we have these tools already. What they're trying to incorporate here is the prevailing fragile view that people are not allowed to create fear in other people.
Yeah.
Not, again, I have to underline, not the fear of violence, just generally make them feel anxious. And apparently people feel that all the time. People complained, of course. One of the best examples is the trucker convoy. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the citizens of Ottawa complained about the fear and anxiety they experienced. I mean, I was there. There was nothing that could have created a fear of violence, because there was no violence. Everybody was cheerful and friendly, and they were protesting, of course, but there was nothing like that. And yet, this narrative that the trucker convoy created a sense of fear in the community has persisted, and I think that's the kind of thing that they're after in this provision.
Yeah, I think also it would be protesting at a library where there are drag queens reading to little
Sure,
children. I
sure.
think it would be designed for that. I think it would be designed for um, protesting near schools. I've seen protests near schools in favor of child protection.
Mhm.
So I'm sure that would be blocked. And I am sympathetic to places of worship, because I honestly, I don't want to show up at church and have a bunch of kooks harassing me, but the police can do their jobs and enforce, you know, the criminal code where it already exists.
Sure. Well, if they're
Like,
standing on the sidewalk with signs that denigrate,
yeah,
Christian belief,
you ignore and move on. But if
you
people are
ignore, move on.
blocking, screaming in your face, pushing you,
But you're
that's
right, exactly.
criminal.
But this is the line we're talking about, right? So if they scream in your face and won't leave you alone and block your passage and move so that you can't get past them, okay, then we have a different story, right? But if they're
Yeah.
simply expressing a view with the design even to intimidate your beliefs, well, so be it.
Yeah. And and I wonder, I don't know if it's just speculation or not, but having seen so many events where people are being harassed, outside synagogues in particular with the pro Hamas activists,
Sure.
or counter protesters who are very physically aggressive, say with parental rights groups.
Mhm.
Having seen the two-tier policing,
Yes. Yes.
I don't think that this is going to have the result that people are hoping for. I know that there are various identity groups who are really worried. I know that, say, there has been a skyrocketing of Jew hatred. I think that's objectively factual in
Yes.
Canada, and I
Sure.
report on it. I see it on the streets. I
Yep.
see Islamic supremacists operating with impunity.
Yeah.
But I don't think that this is going to be applied to them because the criminal code already is not being applied. So I don't see why these loosey goosey hates provisions or fear inducing provisions are going to be applied when actual physical assault is not being policed, when
Right.
harassment and intimidation and death threats and incitement of violence are not being policed. Why would this be policed? Those are much more concrete and tangible.
And you're alluding to a larger problem that we have, which is when you're in a system, a legal regime in which there are laws about everything. Everything. There's a law or a policy or a guideline or a directive or an order about everything. And those laws are so numerous and the discretion is so wide that the laws are applied selectively. That means you don't know what the law is by reading the law. You have to wait until the decision of the officials to know what's going to be enforced at any particular situation, right? Again, that is not the rule of law. That is the rule of their arbitrary decision making. Okay, so we've empowered the decision makers by having this voluminous regime of law. And just because you add something to the list doesn't mean it's going to be enforced in your favor. It could be as easily enforced against you because everything is discretionary, right? So we're proceeding under a set of false assumptions.
Yes. Yes, we are. And I can attest to the fact that, I had filed a police report October 7th, 2024, because I was reporting
Mm-hmm.
and I was swarmed and physically assaulted. I couldn't leave the destination.
Mm-hmm.
I had noisemakers used in my ears. I called 911. I couldn't hear the operator well.
Right.
I was being pushed. I had stickers placed on me. Um, it was a scary situation, and I was physically assaulted. And
Mm-hmm.
I was rescued by two private security guards who worked for Place des Arts.
Mm-hmm.
So I went through the rigmarole, and it's long to file a
Mm-hmm.
police report. It's time
Yep.
consuming.
Yes.
You have to wait for the police to come.
Yep.
You're interviewed. You have to fill out paperwork. You have to provide them with your, personal information.
Mm-hmm.
Then one of the security guards also gave a witness statement. So there was the 911 recording. There was a video from Place des Arts. There were videos that I had taken. Um, there was, yeah. So the 911 called the video, two sets of videos basically,
Mm-hmm.
and a witness, and then my personal witness statement. And it took a year for the Crown to tell the police officer, the investigating officer, that they weren't going to proceed with charges. So
Right.
these are actual, tangible, provable crimes.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't very, very often that a physical assault will be recorded, right? So I would have thought that that would be a slam dunk, but for whatever arbitrary reason, the charges are not going to be applied. But then the
Yeah, no,
same the
yes,
same person
right,
can look at something and oh, she said she made a mean tweet and decide that that needs to be prosecuted. Like it
sure,
doesn't
sure.
seem consistent to me.
But see, this is another feature of the system that we have. It's another, if I can, I don't like to use the word lightly, but it's another kind of tyranny. And it goes like this. You're in a legal regime in which, and not all the time, but as a pattern, very serious things are ignored and very minor things are strictly enforced. And you can see that pattern all over the place in the media and the news. Like, but this guy committed a violent offense and now he's out on bail. But I'm being pulled into court for a speeding ticket. Or we got this government scandal where there's millions and millions of dollars involved, no prosecution, and yet there's this sort of minor conflict over a commercial contract, which is taken seriously. It's like, okay, this is just one more expression of this pattern that I talked about, which is everything's discretionary, and when everything is discretionary, it has the potential to be political, and that's where you get two-tier policing accusations coming from. It's like, you guys are not applying an even hand to this. It's all very well to have a policy about enforcement. I mean, you need some discretion inside the system, but when it looks to be blatantly one-sided, or to prefer one kind of things over the other kind of things, then people are going to start to lose confidence in the justice of the legal system. And once you lose that, you've lost a lot.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I don't have confidence in the system. I consider now that we're living under anarcho-tyranny, and quite frankly, I'm pleasantly surprised when there's a ruling that seems consistent. Like I'm like, oh, that's so exciting.
Right.
And I don't think people understand that about 90% of the judges are liberal appointees at this point.
That's true.
So we have an ideologically captured regime. I it's when someone is potentially facing years in prison for mischief,
Yes.
for peacefully protesting,
Uh-huh.
but you have foreigners coming here who sexually assault
Mhm.
women and they get a slap on the wrist. I
Yes.
don't know how I can't see that as a narco tyranny.
The experience of the COVID protesters is one of the leading illustrations of the problem that we're talking about, and it's very difficult to ignore it or put it aside. I mean, it is what it is. We can all see what happened there and how seriously that was taken, and the resources that were poured into it, and the length of time that it took, and the sentence that the Crown requested, compared to the way other very serious crimes are treated by the same system. I mean, you can't take your eyes away from that and not come to a conclusion that something is not right. So I take your point for sure.
Yeah. So is it a good time to go to Bill C8?
Sure, yes. There's there's
Okay.
there's there's, there's more in C9 that's not good, but it's on the same theme, right? It is. Oh well, let's just go on to C8. So C8 is a much different kind of bill, and it one portion of it deals with amendments to the Telecommunications Act, which doesn't sound like it's related at all, but it is in this sense. So one of the proposed provisions of C8 is to give the minister the power, essentially, to take people off the internet. So let me just read the provision so people can hear for themselves. Okay, this is going to be the new 15.2 bracket 1 of the Telecommunications Act. So, if there are reasonable grounds to believe that it is necessary to do so, to secure the Canadian telecommunications system against any threat, including interference, manipulation, disruption, or degradation, the minister may prohibit a telecommunications service provider from providing any service to any person. Okay. So if for some reason the minister has decided that you constitute a threat, they can just phone up your internet provider and say, cut them off. Moreover, if that kind of an order is made, the bill goes on to say, an order may include a provision prohibiting the disclosure of its existence. In other words, if they make such an order taking you off, they don't even have to show that there was an order. You can just be dropped and have no idea why.
So
Now
is
there,
that across the board, or is that, like, I'm assuming it's from the internet? Like, you will not be able to access an internet service provider after that point, right?
well, see, but this, it all depends, right? It all depends what the order says and what the government decides and what the minister wants, and everything is potentially, and not, it's not always going to be opaque and hidden, but it has the potential to be. In other words, we are now subject to their discretion about how they want to do this, how they're going to, review certain kinds of threats, what kind of threats constitute a threat, what kind of disruption constitutes a disruption. I mean, we saw what happened during the convoy with
Yeah.
people's bank accounts being frozen. And at the time, everybody thought, well, but that's outrageous. That can't be. But now it can be. And so people are going to think, well, yeah, but they're not going to go ahead and, actually take you off the internet because of stuff that you're saying. That's not what this sounds like it's designed for. It doesn't talk about language, but nevertheless, once you give power to the authorities, it's up to the authorities how they're going to exercise it. And to challenge it means you have to, go into a court and get judicial review, which is not very effective. It takes a long time. It's very expensive. It's not robust. So, you're already into dangerous territory. Even if it's not crystal clear that the provision itself is going to lead to bad outcomes. If it's vague enough and gives power, then you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And that's the problem.
And how would you go to court if there's no
If
clear
you
order?
don't know there's an order, I mean, it's like, okay, so I want to review an order that I don't know exists. The court's going to say, well, we don't know what to do here. You'd have to challenge the decision of your own service provider to cut you off, the reasons for which you don't know. It's very difficult.
And so how would the state get the ISPs to agree to this? Because don't they have some protections under corporate laws?
No, I mean, so part of the intent of this bill, like so many other developments with our governments, they want control over things. So we are in a managerial age for governments. And we have a managerial state. The government believes, all its people believe, that its mandate is to manage us, is to manage society, is to keep everything on track, to make sure nobody colors outside the lines. And this is designed to bring that sector under better, closer supervision. I mean, just imagine the degree of supervision that they have over other sectors already, like the banks, for example. Canadian banks are basically a product of the government. It's not a free market. I mean, there are other kinds of financial institutions. Credit unions, for example, are provincial responsibility, and banks are federal. So you have the two things sort of in the same space, but not exactly. But the degree of supervision that the federal government has over banks is extreme. It's going to be the same way for telecommunications companies, if it's not already. I mean, the main service providers in this sector are very well protected by governments. There's not good competition and so on. So we have so back to the theme here. The problem is not just C9. Its problem is not just C8. The problem is the way our government works and the ideas and the assumptions upon which it is based. And until we turn around and look at those assumptions, then things are going to continue to proceed down this route. and we are going to get more and more government supervision. We are going to be more and more under its thumb. And until we challenge the premise of this approach, objecting to specific bills is important, but that's not going to actually turn the ship around.
Yeah, I agree. The philosophical underpinnings are something that I try and have discussions with people about, but it's not as interesting to people when there isn't something tangible to attach theory to. But if
Sure.
you have really firm principles, then they never fail you. Like I
Right.
was, I'm not bragging by any means or asserting like a superiority over other people, but I was against every aspect of the COVID regime from before the first lockdown
Right.
because it was counter to my principles. So
Yes.
I didn't need to wait for any kind of scientific validation one way
Exactly.
or
Good
the
for you.
other.
Well done. Well done. That's good. That's good. I've been preaching this hymn for a long time on COVID. I mean, let's just run this to ground a little bit, right? So the objection that a lot of people have made to the COVID regime and still make is that the data showed that the policies were wrong. And I have no doubt that that is correct. That's true. But that is completely beside the point. Just as you're saying. I mean, the data doesn't matter. You can't tell me to do X. There shouldn't be a policy about X, period. My risk is mine to decide. And it's none of your business. And so right from the very beginning, when the first lockdowns came, those people with a framework like you're describing that you have in your head should have said, no, this is wrong. We're not doing this for 2 weeks. We're not doing it for 2 years. You cannot do this, period. Don't care what the cause is. The facts don't matter. This is a violation of the principle.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the only people I knew who were like-minded at the time were direct family. That was it.
Right.
I didn't have any friends who were like-minded until a range of like a few weeks in to a few months. That's when a lot of people came over. And
Right.
then there was another tranche that came over. In Quebec, we had curfews, so that
Yes,
alienated
you did. Yes,
another
right.
tranche of people.
Right.
And then there was the last people that were alienated when the jab passes came in.
Right.
But that was already a year and a half into
Yes, it
it.
was. Yes, it was. Much too late. Yep.
So, I either have control over my own face or I don't.
Right. Yep.
You know,
Correct.
that's it. So, yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to teach principles though, getting into kind of political philosophy and that framework, and then secular humanism and conservatism and the roots of conservatism and what leads people where. And I think personally, like, I know you're a libertarian, but one of my frustrations with libertarians is
Mhm.
that we always get led to the same place. We always get led to the same place because there are no stops on anything.
What place are we led to?
To liberalism.
Oh, I see. I see. How interesting. Okay. Well, so before we go on, this is a very interesting topic to me.
Yeah,
But
that's
before we,
aside. Sorry, you
before,
can't get me. Don't let me get off on a tangent.
no, but let me just say this about libertarians and COVID. Because a lot of libertarians, especially prominent libertarian organizations, were terrible
They were
on COVID.
terrible.
Terrible. They completely failed the test. Completely failed the test. I've read libertarian justifications for COVID for vaccine mandates. Like, what are you talking about? You're just an apologist now for the regime whose policies you think are utilitarian. That is not a libertarian, for my money. So I take your point, and that label doesn't do much for me anymore for lots of reasons, but including that experience. But you raise a question about whether or not things have to be either conservative or progressive, or whether or not there's a viable individualist, freedom-oriented set of principles, which is a very interesting topic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another topic for another day, but one maybe could come back to discuss that because it's actually something I've always wanted to talk about with you when I hear you interviewed by other people. I'm like, but where's this would be the rebuttal. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. Okay, good. Well, let's do it. You can bring those rebuttals to our conversation. That would be
yeah,
good. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for now, so for Bill C, I keep confusing the two of them.
C9 is the hate speech bill, and C8 is the telecommunications bill.
Okay, so for the telecommunications bill, I
Yeah.
think to steel man the argument,
Yeah.
I presume that the government is putting forth the legislation for like cyber attacks.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And so and one can't say that that's not a legitimate concern,
Yeah,
especially when we've established a society in which all of the infrastructure is dependent upon that system. Like if someone was able successfully to bring down the system, then all of the things that keep us alive would go down,
yeah,
right? So this is partly a function of having slipped into a bad construct for the way. So let me put it this way: efficient systems are not robust systems. Efficient systems, partly because of their efficiency, can be easily attacked. And if you bring down one thing, the whole thing goes. That's efficient, but it's not robust. A robust thing, a robust system has silos. When they're not connected, you can take down one silo and the rest of them are still standing, right? And we have right now an efficient and not robust system. And so the justification, the concern that is claimed to be at the bottom of this, kind of makes some sense. But again, it's based upon assumptions because the whole governance system is run from the center. And that's part of its problem. You can see that also in so many areas. Like, for example, C5, which is another bill, which is now passed. C5 has a Building Canada Act part to it. And Building Canada Act is the idea that the government will put together this list of important projects to build the economy. And if your project's on the list, then you get to circumvent all of the red tape that the government has put in place. Okay, but this is a central planning model. The presumption is that the government's going to decide what's most important. They're going to make their own list. They're going to lead your project through around and avoid all of their own red tape. It's like, this is not the way to do it. The way to do it is to get rid of the red tape and let people do things on their own. It's not central
yeah.
planning. It's not a government list. It's not a government priority. It's like, back off and leave us alone to do this on our own. This is the one thing they cannot and will not do.
No, and again, to return to the theme of anarcho-tyranny, there are already provisions in place to deal with cyber crimes. I'm not techie, so I have no idea if they're adequate, and perhaps they need to be more robust in a very narrow way. I'm like a hands talker, so I hit things all the time, but um, to protect, say, I don't know, people's banks from being hacked. But we already know that the state is going to pick winners or losers because there was a hacker who leaked the contributors to the trucker convoy, that list,
Yeah.
including people's addresses,
Yep.
their emails, all sorts of personal information about their banking. That was leaked.
Mm.
I don't believe that that person was ever charged with a crime. And in fact, the state used that information
Sure.
against people
Mm.
because they then had a list and they were able to shut down people's bank accounts. And I know for a fact two people who had made contributions who then were assaulted. They had people show up at their place
Wow.
because they then had their address. One of them had to move. He was an immigrant who needed to move to the country after this happened.
Mm-mm.
And I wasn't even aware that my information had been leaked until he told me because he was very good with tech.
Right.
But for whatever reason, it just showed, my name. It didn't have the address, everything else. But for other people, there was
Mm.
more information.
Mm.
So it's really scary because we know that serious criminals, if they're aligned with the objectives of the state, and the narratives of the state, they're not being prosecuted from, I it's these, I'm not cherry picking cases. We have like robust case law in terms of foreigners committing violent crimes, let's say,
Mhm.
where they're not being
Sure.
charged to the full extent of the law. So I'm not cherry picking to try to make my point. I think
Mhm.
we've seen this well established at this point, certainly over the past 5 years, if not longer. So creating more laws that are very ambiguous, that are very intangible, to me is scary. It's a bit like in the Soviet era when citizens
Sure.
had no idea how the law would be applied.
Sure. 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 Yeah, but this gets back to the theme of selective enforcement. I mean, and no, almost any bill that you read, if you read it with the assumption that there's going to be selective enforcement, then they're nearly always bad, because selective enforcement is the problem, and the bill's not going to fix that. Right? So we have basic problems with the way the thing is working now. And yes, there are specific problems in these bills, no question. But there are more basic problems with the way the thing is evolved, and they're going to be very difficult problems to fix.
Yeah, they will be very difficult problems to fix. And I'm not seeing very much pushback, to be honest.
Nope, 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 no, because, and again, this goes to these assumptions and frameworks that people have in their heads, and a lot of people now have in their heads an idea that says, um, progressivism is correct and everything else is evil. And if you speak contrary to the way that progressivism demands, then you are in fact wrong and you need to be controlled. If we've reached the stage where people can say with a straight face, and they are, that words are violence, then you're going to get censorship, because they're censoring violence. That's what they think that they're doing. The
Yeah.
inability to distinguish between actual violence and speech means that the lines that we have in our heads, you and I and the other people who think like us, the line between, well, that's speech and that's violence. I mean, we have to start thinking like they do, so that we understand where they're coming from and the danger that they pose. They don't have that line in their head. They think it's all part of a grayscale, and they're drawing the line where they think we're being outrageous.
But
And
by the same token, though, the very same people issue threats
oh,
against
but
those that they've deemed are fascists. Like I get death threats.
well, but this is part of the situation. If if you're someone who has accepted the idea that speech is violence, then you're entitled to use violence against violence, right? They are justifying their set of ideas is justifying using violence against speech, because speech is violence, right? So this gets us to a very bad place.
Yeah.
If we're not able to distinguish between those two things, it's going to be very
Yeah.
bad.
It's really worrying. And I think about, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to get this wrong, but I think about there was a case in the summer in Montreal
Yeah.
of an Orthodox Jew who was walking through a park with his children,
Mhm.
and he was violently assaulted by somebody. And it was, I thought it was obvious that the man who assaulted him was motivated to a certain extent by hatred towards the visibly Jewish man, because he, threw the yarmulke, the kippah, like dismissively.
Mhm.
But the assailant um, now is in the process of having the courts run interference for this physical assault on the basis of the fact that he may or may not be mentally compromised. And one of the excuses that was listed, and this I'm not, is farcical, but people can look it up,
Mhm.
was that the weather might have been a contributing factor to the disruption in his mood.
The weather. Really?
The weather. So people are very upset about this naturally. And some of the people who are upset about this are enthusiastic about the hate crime legislation. But in my mind, someone who violently assaults another person already has hate in their heart. We can just assume that and we can just deal with the
Yeah.
assault, and we can absolutely make sure that people go to prison when they assault somebody else and not run interference for them and not let them off the hook based on the weather, mental illness, this or that or the other. If you assault somebody, you should
Yeah.
go to jail.
Yes, correct. That's correct. And this is part of the problem with putting hatred into the equation, right? So going back to C9, one of the other provisions in C9 is to create an additional offense, right? So
Yeah.
if you commit a criminal offense with hatred against an identifiable group, you commit another offense as well, and you punish for that as well. Okay. But here's what you're doing. You're setting up, two tiers of violent crimes.
Yeah. And
And so
there's no way of knowing what someone has in their heart. Like if I'm assaulted by someone,
yeah,
whether they're assaulting me because I'm a random person on the street, because they don't like blondes, because they don't like Christians, because they don't like white women, because they don't like women, is irrelevant. I'm assaulted.
yes, correct, correct. So let's compare two assaults. Okay. One assault is committed because the person is a certain kind of person, belongs to a group. And the other assault is just against any random person on the street. Like the first person they saw, they grievously injured, attacked. Okay. Which of those two things is worse? And for my money, the answer is neither. They're both the same. They're both violent attacks against somebody. And you're not allowed to do that. And you should punish both of them severely. But the fact that, you chose one victim, you didn't choose the other one. It was random. Is it more evil to be random or to be selective? And the answer is, what are you talking about? It's evil to attack other people. And one is not worse than the other one. They're both terrible.
Yeah.
And we're setting up a hierarchy so that one is worse than the other one. And that makes no sense to me at all.
No. So at what stage are the bills? Like what's happening for
Right.
people? What can they do? What stage are they at? Who could they reach out to if they're not happy about the bills? What is a good way to, harness some of the energy for people who are
Right.
against it? He doesn't like the bills.
They're both through second reading. C9 is going to committee to be studied. C8 is not in committee yet. The best thing to do is the same as it always is, which is harass. I don't mean that in a criminal sense, but harass your MP. Send them notes and letters and emails that you don't like the bill. That this is a liberal government
and call.
calls very effective. But this is a liberal government bill, so the liberal members of parliament probably ignore you, and the conservative members of parliament are already against it. So the battle lines are already drawn in the sand. And it really depends upon, in a minority parliament, which is what this is, but doesn't seem to be. Depends upon the support of the other parties. So we'll see what happens. But we got lucky with C63, which died when the election was called. There are noises that the Liberals are going to bring that back and try again with it, which would be so C63 is worse than C9, and so that lies in our future as well. But that's where we're at.
Yeah. So how long will it take for these bills to become law, the current state, provided the Liberals don't call another election, which might happen?
Well, it depends. It depends upon the determination with which the government is determined to pass them, because they have only a certain amount of time and resources, and they put them on the bills that they think are most important. I don't know how these rank in the Liberal hierarchy, but it could be not too long. I mean, so once Bill C9 is through committee and is passed at third reading in the House of Commons, then it will go to the Senate, and the Senate will do its own process, and that will take a little while. But it could be passed sometime in the new year, in the spring. It depends. It depends. It's very hard to say.
And do you think there's any chance that the Senate won't rubber stamp it?
I think that's unlikely, especially because the senators are now mostly liberal appointees. Uh, yeah, one would
In
like to.
fairness, there's also a communist in there.
Well, it's probably more than one.
Yeah. There's one that comes to mind immediately, but yeah, that as like a CCC plant, but there are other like ideological communists. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So what these stages afford more than anything else is an opportunity to talk about and expose the plan. And it's not really feasible to think that you're going to stop it in these ways, but it's at least an obligation on the part of the government and the institution to lay bare what it is that they have in mind. That's the benefit more than anything else.
So it's a bit bleak then.
Yeah, I don't think things look good for this country right now. Frankly,
No.
I really don't. It's very difficult to when you look at what many Canadians appear to believe about what is right and good and proper and so on. It's like makes you shake your head as though that they live in a different place than you do and don't see the things that you see.
They quite literally do because of the algorithm that they're shoved into. I know this because I'm a talker and I have conversations with everybody in real life, not just online. And if you're able to have a calm conversation with somebody who's low information,
Mm-hmm.
then they almost always end up shocked by what you're telling them.
Right.
So I think it's fair to say that what most Canadians parrot is shocking.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if they were properly informed by an independent press, then things would look very different. It's just we have a bunch of regime apparatchiks getting their
Yes.
government paycheck,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
propping up the lies, and then we have every institution is captured. But if they're exposed to any criticism whatsoever or robust debate, any of these people, their arguments would crumple in front of the average person. But it's what information people have access to.
Right, right, no doubt. Sure, but it is also a function that those institutions that you're talking about are also thoroughly captured,
Yeah,
right?
everyone.
And basically all of them. I can't
Yeah.
think of a major public institution that is not being run in accordance with the ideas that we're talking about.
And most private ones, and even
Sure,
most churches, even most
a,
religious
a
institutions are
lot of them,
captive.
a lot of them are, and a lot of the private ones are doing so that they are not punished for coloring outside the lines.
Yeah,
So even if you are able to persuade, a certain number of individual people that the story that they're being fed is actually not correct, you still got a long way to go after that because
yeah,
those people may not be powerful people, and the powerful people have a vested interest in the status quo. So the prospect for actually reforming this country is very poor, and
yeah.
it's one reason why I've started pushing Alberta independence. I just don't see the end game in terms of a successful turning the ship around in the Canadian context.
I think two things would have to happen that would radically change Canada. One would be Quebec separating. That would solve a lot of problems. People are
Hmm.
going to be very upset with me if I say that, but it would solve a lot of problems. Or
Hmm.
Alberta separating. They both would be fundamental game changers.
Yes, you have to. You have to. This country, for my money, needs a political disruption.
Yeah,
Something that makes people realize that the thing is on the wrong track. And it
yeah,
requires some fundamental rethinking, not just tinkering about policy or around the edges, like, we have to build a pipeline. I mean, we do need to build a pipeline, but that's not the problem. The problem is the way the place is run. And until you have a disruption that dislodges the established status quo, you're not going to get anywhere.
No, the options become really limited. And I think, I don't think anybody wants a violent revolution. So,
No, you don't want violence. Violence is the thing we don't want. You don't want violence. But you also you don't want violence. But you also don't want violence to be used against you.
yeah.
Right? And that's the trick. We have to insist that violence not be imposed upon us. And Alberta independence is one of the options for trying to cause an earthquake that is not violent.
Yeah.
That's why it's a good shot.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, it's, the way our constitution is structured at this point, with everything that's being written into it, like transfer payments or equalization payments, whatever they're called.
Yep.
The country is basically held hostage by Quebec. And the driving force, like every election is decided by Quebec. Like, I knew on election night this year, even though I wasn't 100% because I had like a TBI still, but I was just looking at the ridings and I was like, okay, the handwriting unfortunately already is on the wall.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so you can't have a confederation where the most Marxist province is in, holding the rest of the country hostage for decades. Like, it's going to end up creating a lot of resentment and falling apart. And I think that's where we're at.
This is where I think a lot of Albertans have gotten to. I mean, so
And I'm
Alberta,
a Quebecer. Like,
I
I'm
understand,
broadcasting from Quebec.
and I'm an Ontarian, right? So, but Alberta has a lot of legitimate complaints.
Yeah.
But a lot of Albertans, I think, have gotten to the point, and I agree with them, have gotten to the point of thinking, well, we have these, policy complaints about pipelines and emission caps and so on, and those are legitimate. No, don't get me wrong. But they've also gotten to the point of thinking, you know what? I don't want to live in the same country as those people anymore, because we just think so differently. Our culture is so different. Our values are so different. I don't want to persuade them anymore. I don't want them to persuade me anymore. We just want a divorce.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah. It also makes sense in the context that theoretically a confederation should be, a loosely affiliated set of provinces and territories where like there's a lean federal government overseeing the most basic functions of a federal government. So the military, the borders, things like this, some international trade, what have you.
Sure.
And the provinces can be really distinct, and you can go and live in Alberta and pay 10% income tax and basically not care what's happening in
I'm not
Marxist Quebec.
sure
But that's
anymore.
not the way it works. It's not at all the way it works.
And I'm not sure that model can be successful. I mean, that's the way that the U.S. was conceived.
Yeah.
And yet the federal government has become dominant.
Yeah.
And we sort of have that here in Canada as well. Certainly the federal government is more dominant than our constitution, the original constitution, may have contemplated. I'm not sure that you can have a country with regions that have a completely different set of values.
The only country I can think of that comes to mind, and there might be others, but is Switzerland. The cantons are really, really distinctive.
That's true. That is true. They have a great deal of independence. That's a good point. But on the other hand, Switzerland itself is a fairly contained, small, maybe not completely unified in that sense, but it's more homogeneous than Canada is, I think.
Yeah, and it has a longer history. So that,
it does.
Tradition matters, continuity, and they hold to it in Europe more than we do here, even though there's still a lot of the same problems. But the Swiss have been a little bit bolder and a little bit more independent from the rest of the continent,
But watch out though for the subsidiarity argument. The subsidiarity argument being, the closer your level of government, the better. So, provinces are preferable to federal government. Municipalities are preferable to provinces. Local is best. And that's not necessarily true. Here's the problem. When you think of government corruption and variation from the rule of law, what levels are the most corrupt? And we all know about the corruption of the federal government. And I'm not saying it's not corrupt. But the most corrupt levels are the closest ones, the smallest ones. I mean, you think of municipalities.
Yeah.
Municipal government is the most corrupt of the three levels of government. It's terrible because everything is personal. Everything depends upon whether you know the local mayor or not, right? That's a terrible way to govern yourself, right? So watch out for this. Let's get rid of the higher levels and just deal with the lower ones, because you might be worse off than you are right now.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. Actually, being a Montrealer, I can say I calculated, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, I calculated the amount of the budget that was going to the mob.
Right, right.
And it was enormous. And that was the
Sure.
proven amount. That was the proven
Right,
amount, like in a court of law, the asserted amount. It was just astonishing year after year, just going to the mob. And
yep,
everybody knows, like,
right,
it wasn't like the Gomery Commission and these different commissions, like, they weren't proving anything to Montrealers that Montrealers didn't already know. They were just quantifying,
right,
the amount of corruption. And it was to the
right,
point
right,
where the replacement mayors were then being implicated
right,
in
right.
crime. So they kept replacing the mayors. And when I think back to the mayor that I liked the best, that I thought, probably was equally corrupt. I don't really know, but it was a mayor who was obsessed with flowers. And I can't remember his name, but you'd see him and he was always very friendly. He was very focused on flowers. And so he just spent a lot of money on flowers. There was no obsession with bike lanes. There wasn't much else going on. It just, he laid low, did all the same other terrible things that the mayors did, but at least we had nice flowers, right? At least
Oh
we had
boy,
something.
oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Well, this managerial state that I talk about, uh, people shouldn't be um, thinking that that's just at the federal level. I mean, the
Yeah.
managerial state is everywhere, including our provinces. Our provinces are very managerial, and in some ways, they have their hands over more things than the federal government does, because they have the jurisdiction to have them there, right?
Yeah.
So this is not just a problem of a particular government at a particular moment in time. This is a long-standing trend and a way of doing business in government that is totally off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. When I think about the amounts, the municipal taxes
Yep.
and
Yes.
vehicle registration and various fees that are associated with that. I think I pay almost $600 a year just for my vehicle registration. That's not
Of course.
including my
Of
insurance. That's just the registration. And then I have to pay for my driver's license on top of that.
Sure.
You
And,
know,
and the
that,
problem is we are used to this. We are used to a world in which we are not allowed to do anything without approval of some
yeah,
kind, a license or a permit or a user fee or a tax or a policy or that's the way this is. This is the way it works now. And everybody, or a lot of people who are alive today, have grown up in it and think that's what government's supposed to be.
yeah,
No,
and they don't see that there are people drag racing in Brampton at 3 a.m. and that all of the paperwork in the world is not preventing that from happening.
sure. Right.
Because the argument is always to keep us safe. It's
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's bleak. It's bleak, but at least we live in an age of conversations. I also think that there will be a catch up because for me anyway, I just came on Twitter like initially I was just lurking on Twitter during the COVID regime, and it was to read basically the arguments of dissenters because they were really only on X, and to learn a little bit about some of the scientific arguments. So initially I was just reading,
Mhm.
but it's become like social media has become, I think, a really valuable tool in educating people who
Yes.
otherwise will not have access to any information. And that's
No
that's
doubt. No doubt
part of the
about it.
reason why these bills scare me so much as well,
Yes.
because
Yes.
they
'Cause
they
they
will
threaten that.
target.
They threatened that vehicle. Yes, and frankly, that was one of the main battles during COVID, right?
Yeah.
And in a sense, it was the emergence of a public discourse online that managed to allow us to challenge and avoid and defeat eventually the government narrative and the government regime about all of this. And that I'm sure has not been missed on the part of those who would like to do the same kind of thing again. So point taken. Absolutely.
Yes. And I often wonder what would have happened had there been no trucker convoy.
No kidding. Yeah. No,
Like,
imagine this: no convoy and no X and no social media. If you hadn't had those two things, how would you have known that there were other people who thought the same thing as you if you didn't happen to run into them one to one on the street?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was the only way at a certain point until more people started being opposed to it. But in large part, that was because of social media.
Yes.
Well, okay. Well, I guess I should let you go because I think we're a little bit over time. I know you're busy running around. So, where can
Right.
people find you, Bruce?
Yes. Right. Thanks. So, rightsprobe.org is our website. You can also follow me on Substack at Bruce Pardy at substack.com. And you can follow me on X at Party Bruce. Thanks for asking.
You're very welcome, and keep fighting the good fight. You know, you're one of the good ones.
Thanks. You too. Well done.
Thank you,
Yeah.
and thanks for coming on. And thanks to everybody for watching. I'm not good at saying thank you to people who watch. I always get very focused on my conversation and forget that other people are participating. So thank you. And I'm really sorry. I'm just looking on the side. I'm just terrible at looking at comments while I'm ask me and reposting too many low information Canadians who are fine. My final thought is when I was having a conversation before the lockdowns began with someone who was like-minded, he said to me, none of what's coming down the pipeline with the COVID mandates, we didn't know exactly at that point.
Mhm.
None of it will stop until people start losing their income and losing their homes. And it
Mhm.
won't stop a minute before that because
Mhm.
Canadians are very obedient people.
Mhm. Yes, they are. Yeah.
And that largely proved to be true.
Yes. Yes. I'm afraid that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think with more abstract bills like this one, like more intellectual bills that are less tangible, that's definitely going to be the case, that we're not going to see that much pushback unless maybe some progressives start getting taken out by the system. But the system isn't, the legislation is not designed that way. So we'll see.
Right.
Okay, so have a good day. And for everybody, I am going to also upload this onto YouTube and Rumble, but it takes me a minute usually. So look for that if you don't like watching X, and you can share that way as well. And I hope everybody has a great day.